Hello watch enthusiasts. Now aside from the very many sports watches released at Baselworld this year, many very elegant dress watches have also been released, which are particularly notable. Now as with the other videos I've made of Basel in 2017, I would just like to talk about what I think are the most notable models, and I will be leaving some out, but I think the ones I've included really are the most important in terms of changes to lineups and the most interesting. Now the first watch I'd like to talk about is the new version of the Breguet 7147. And this is a watch which has been known for its very elaborate guilloche dial in silver, but now this dial has been replaced on two of the four models now available with an enamel version. And this is a beautifully finished white enamel which has again features the same off-center second hand, as well as now having Arabic numerals rather than the Roman numerals of the previous version. I think this cleans up the watch a great deal and does make me think of certain Grand Seiko models when I look at this, although done in that particular Breguet way with those right-angle lugs and that very beautifully finished and extremely slim case. Now this dial is by no means simple because it has the numerals hand-painted on, as well as having a sunken second dial, if you will, which though not actually indicated in terms of any sort of writing, is clearly visible from the side or in very good lighting from the front, which adds a certain depth to an intrinsically very flat dial. This watch is powered by the 35 jewel caliber 502.3 SD, a 2.4mm thick automatic movement with an off-center rotor on the caseback, which is again very beautifully finished and features an anti-magnetic silicon balance spring and also has a free-sprung balance, giving the watch extra features, if you will, without actually adding any visible features at the front of the watch. Now this 40mm watch with a 45-hour power reserve is available in two versions, a white gold and a rose gold. My favourite being the white gold, but to each their own. And the white gold is $21,000, while the rose gold is $21,500. Now from Patek Philippe, two watches have caught my eye this year, and the first of which is the anniversary Aquanaut 5168G. Now the Aquanaut is a watch which I can't help liking. It's very different from the other watches in the Patek Philippe lineup, and certainly is a curious piece. And I think what's particularly nice about this watch is the fact that it's a sort of a far more wearable version of the Nautilus. And though I love the Nautilus's design, it's a particularly original watch. I simply couldn't live with one on the basis that the bracelet is far too scratch prone and not really high enough quality. And also the fact that one can't put the watch on a strap is, in my opinion, quite aggravating. Now the differences between this Aquanaut and other Aquanauts is the fact that this grows to 42mm, which is a quite drastic change over the other model's 40mm, but all the proportions and the design language has remained exactly the same on this model as with the others. This is also the first Aquanaut to be white gold, and thus warranting its price of $38,000. That said, though, this watch is by no means that large a move away from other Aquanauts, as it retains that dial design with those strakes in that curve going up the dial. That said, though, the colour of the dial is very particular to this model and this anniversary model, as it's a gradient blue, but unlike the gradient blues we've seen from brands such as Rolex, where the blue fades into black down the height of the dial, here it's very different, and one has blue at the very centre of the dial, while this fades into a deep black towards the edges. In terms of the movement, nothing has changed, and this watch retains the caliber 324 SC, which is the same movement as seen in other Aquanauts, which again is something which I would have appreciated to see a new movement, but nonetheless, as an anniversary model, I can see why this was reused. Now the second watch from Patek is definitely one of my favourites from the show, and this is the new 5320G. And this is their new perpetual calendar, and I must say I think this really did do a fantastic job of looking very classic in its design, but while bringing Patek into the modern age. Now, it has quite a complex dial with its calendar and Moonphase at 6 o'clock, along with having the day and month at 12 o'clock in two apertures. But I think my favourite bit about this watch is the dial itself, which is this wonderful creamy enamel, which I think is a much better choice than white, or going for a textured dial. Because this gives a very, very clean look to the watch, and I think suits the whole design of the timepiece perfectly. The case is 40mm in diameter and is only produced in white gold, though I wouldn't be surprised if other models of this watch come out later. The hands and the numerals are another one of my favourite parts of this watch, which are syringe hands filled with luminescent material, along with the numerals, which are Arabic numerals around the dial, giving a much softer look than Roman numerals, and are also luminescent, making this watch quite a practical dress watch, as well as a strong dress piece from Patek. The movement inside this watch is the caliber 324 SQ, which is an in-house automatic caliber from Patek Philippe. And it's undergone several developments for this watch, but overall it's remained quite a standard movement for Patek, and has been used for a while now. But nonetheless, it's a reliable and very beautifully finished movement from the brand. That said, though, I must say, for the price they're offering this watch, I do think that I would have expected a little bit more, because frankly, the price for this watch is incredible, exorbitant. This watch comes in at €82,000, which really is an astronomical amount of money to spend on a watch with a case which is merely stamped. So I have several reservations with this watch, but that said, I do think it's still a beautiful piece, irrespective of the price. Now, the next watch on this list is a model from Rolex, and this is a model which I'm quite impressed by. This is the new Cellini Moonphase, and it's the first Moonphase from Rolex in over 40 years, making it quite a notable model. Now, this watch is again the dress model from Rolex, and I think this is really the ultimate dress model from Rolex on the basis that it has an extremely minimal case, with a merely fluted bezel and a very simply polished rest to the case, finished in the ever-rose gold of Rolex. Of course, this doesn't have the water resistance of the Oyster line, but frankly, for a dress watch of this type, I don't think it's necessary, so I can definitely understand the choice to go without this in this timepiece. It also has a very nicely finished onion crown, which is easy to use next to the case, despite being quite thin. In terms of complications, this watch has the time and the date, as well as that Moonphase. And the Moonphase is quite interesting because it's a fully displayed Moonphase with a simple indicator at 12 to show where on the moon one can see. And though this isn't as easy to read as other Moonphases, I think it does give a nice look to the dial, having that full circular blue aperture. One feature I do like is the fact the date is a pointer-style date rather than having an aperture for this, because I think it makes the dial much cleaner and also in some ways better and more legible. Also, another interesting touch is the fact that the moon on the Moonphase indicator is in fact a fragment of meteorite, which I think adds to that celestial aspect of this watch. The price for this 39mm watch is €24,000, and though this may seem like quite a lot for a watch, I do think that from Rolex this is actually quite a reasonable price, considering their other prices in ever-rose gold, as this watch does actually feature a complication which we haven't seen before. And though it isn't an oyster case, I think it is quite a competitive price with other watches with a Moonphase in this particular category. Another interesting model, this time from Grand Seiko, is the SBGW253, and this is a stainless steel version of the original 1960 edition, which was the first Grand Seiko watch. Of course, back then it was released as Seiko, whereas now it can be branded as only Grand Seiko, as this year they've become their own separate brand from the Seiko as a whole. Now, this watch is quite an interesting manually wound watch, which is 11.2mm thick in this steel version. And I think this will become really quite a classic in future as an interesting re-edition of a previous model. Now, the case of this watch is 38mm, which is larger than 36 the original watch was, but I think is still an attractive size and still a nice and small size for a modern-day timepiece. Again, the design language is very simple and very classic in its aesthetics, but I must say I do like the fact that they've taken this watch to a modern degree of quality and standards, while retaining the older designs. Now, the back of the watch is adorned with a gold medallion explaining the history of the watch and its provenance, while the front is a simple white dial with white indices, white hands, and a blued second hand. Now, inside this watch, we have a manually wound in-house Grand Seiko caliber, which is nothing too impressive or different, but is certainly appropriate for a vintage watch, as it's very much similar to the original, and being manually wound allows this watch to be far slimmer than it would be otherwise. The price for this model comes in at $5,700, which may seem like quite a lot, but being a limited edition of 1960, this is quite an interesting piece, and I think will be one which will be most collectible in future. Now this watch has also been released in a gold version, SBGW252, and this is a slightly slimmer watch at 10.7mm rather than the 11.2, so half a millimetre slimmer, which probably won't be noticeable, but nonetheless is an interesting change. This, of course, is 18 karat gold and is priced at around $17,000. A substantial increase over the steel version, but of course does add that precious metal quality to this watch, which one simply won't find in the steel model. It also shares the movement and all the other specifications with the standard steel version, except that now it's limited to only 354 pieces, and doesn't have a blued second hand, but rather has a full gold handset and dial fittings. The strap this watch is offered on is also different, as it's this rather nice light brown alligator skin strap rather than the black version on the steel model. It also does feature gold text on the dial, which is again a very nice touch, and I think this watch will also be just as successful as the steel version, though of course it will be more rare. The pinnacle of this lineup comes in the form of the SBGW251, and this is limited to 136 pieces to commemorate the 136th anniversary of Seiko, which is an interesting point on the basis that the watch is in fact one of the first watches to be released by Grand Seiko alone, but nonetheless it's an interesting touch. And this watch is a solid 999 platinum cased dress watch, with the same features as the gold version, apart from the fact that it now has a different style of dial now made of platinum, as well as all the fixtures and hands being platinum as well. On this version we also see the fact that this watch is made from 999 platinum rather than 950, which is substantially more pure than normal platinum. Also we see on the dial this engraved Grand Seiko logo rather than having the painted on applied logo as on the various other models. And I think this does add a level of depth to the dial, and having seen this watch in person, the effect created by this really is very impressive. Now the medallion on the back of this case is also not the same as the other models. It's no longer gold, but in this case the same platinum as the case, which adds to the same uniform monochromatic look of the whole watch. Now the price for this zenith really of the Grand Seiko lineup in this commemorative model is around the $30,000 mark. Now the next watch on this list is an automatic 40mm dress watch from Longines called the Heritage 1945. Now this watch is in fact a replica of one of Longines' previous models. This one was 37mm and manually wound, but they decided to like many models, rekindle the spirit of their older timepieces in this fully polished 40mm watch with a flat polished bezel, and in this case a brushed copper style dial with a small seconds dial at 6 o'clock. Now the style of this watch is very much of the time and is extremely simple in its execution. The crown is also a very simple, quite flat and somewhat unassuming style of crown, but nonetheless an interesting touch and one which doesn't change the balance of the watch too much. I think what I most like about this watch is the way this watch doesn't mimic Bauhaus-style watches, but rather has a flavour of its own, with those slim but curved hands, and that sub-second sub-dial at 6 o'clock, which isn't quite centred, which actually I rather like, because it allows space for that automatic symbol and text underneath, which I think balances out the dial quite nicely. The movement inside this watch is an ETA 2895-2, and this is effectively a version of the ETA 2892, with small seconds placed at 6 o'clock. And the movement predicates where that particular subdial is, hence the fact that it isn't centred between 6 and the centre of the dial, but rather raised slightly. This is more of a technical issue than anything else, but personally it doesn't bother me at all. I think this also does match the Longines logo placed between the 12 o'clock centre of the watch, and the very centre of the hands, which I think is again a nice balance, and I think the watch is actually very well considered to be balanced very, very well, and to look very elegant with expanses of blank dial. Now the price of this watch is $1,700, which many people have said is particularly good value, and I can understand for a new release, but I would have appreciated to see this watch at say $1,200 or $1,300. But nonetheless, even at $1,700, I think this is still a very interesting and very attractive timepiece on that very nicely finished distressed leather strap that this watch is offered on. Now the Tissot Powermatic 80 is what I think will be one of the most popular watches at Baselworld 2017. Now this is a dress watch, a mechanical dress watch from Tissot, a stainless steel watch too, and it has a very simple design and fairly sober aesthetics, but nonetheless it is an elegant piece. But the most interesting thing about this watch is the movement. And though based on the ETA 2824, this movement has the added feature of having a silicon balance spring, making it much more anti-magnetic than other ETA movements. Now, I think the most impressive aspect about this watch is the very fact that this watch is placed at a price point which actually makes this watch the least expensive watch with one of these springs in the world, and let alone the least expensive Swiss one. Now, this watch actually costs, in terms of the steel version, on the strap £750, and then about £800 for the version on the bracelet, though I will include prices on the screen, as you'll see. And frankly, I do think this watch is quite remarkable, and it's remarkable that Tissot can produce a watch cost-effectively with a silicon balance spring at this price point. Otherwise, this watch is a 41mm dress watch on either a strap or a bracelet. Personally, I prefer it on the strap, but that's very much a matter of preference rather than any sort of technical advantage, though one will be paying a little bit more for the bracelet. Anyway, I'll conclude this video here, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please do like, share and subscribe to help the channel and to enjoy more content on my channel. Also, do have a look on the channel for the various videos on the other releases at Baselworld this year. So thank you very much for watching. This is Arm on the Watch Guy, over and out.